we're going to delve into the later professional career of Frances Perkins, one of the many unsung heroes of American history. Of course, last month we had the privilege of finding out about her New York years, and tonight we'll be finding out when she goes to D.C. what does she get done. My name is Ellen Snowvis, and I'm on the planning committee for One Book, One Community in the Bridgewater area. Would everybody who is on the planning committee please stand up and just, we can recognize you with a little clap, because it does take work. It's a ton of fun, believe me, especially if you're a reader like we all are. But it does take a lot of coordination and work. And we're thrilled to have the collaboration of West Bridgewater Library, East Bridgewater Library, and Bridgewater Library and Halifax Library. So it's been fun to have that collaboration. And we're busy working on our next spring planning, but we have nothing to disclose yet. Just before we are grateful, very grateful for the Friends of the Bridgewater Public Library for tonight's event. Give them a clap. You know, without Friends groups, we really can't do much programming. So we're very grateful that they prioritized this program for their efforts. Tomorrow night are our last two book discussions of the biography of Frances Perkins that we've been reading by Stephanie Dre. At 5 o'clock at West Bridgewater Library, we'll be talking about it. And then later at 7 o'clock in this library. I'm not sure which room it's in. I don't think it's in this room. Oh,
in the back.
In the back, okay. At 7 o'clock will be that room. And even if you haven't finished reading the book yet, come and you'll enjoy the conversation, because I mean her life is just so fascinating. Then Gloria, will you talk about the Brian Bain lecture that's coming up? Because this is very exciting to our last big event.
Last year you heard Brian Payne talk about the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age, yes. This year he's coming back again because this is his real era of the second New Deal for FDR. He's originally from the history department at Bridgewater State, and he is now the acting dean of the humanities department. And if you were there last year to hear him, he was excellent, and I am sure he will be excellent again. And he's very excited to come back and be asked to come back. So on the 24th of November at 6 o'clock, here, right here.
Put that on your calendar because he is fascinating. He gives a ton of really excellent historical information. So another introduction to our fabulous one-woman show that we get from Janet Parnes. As the founder of Historical Portrayals by Lady J, Janet Parnes has been delighting and educating audiences with portrayals of overlooked American heroines for more than 20 years. Her portrayals whisk audiences back into the life in the colonial, Federalist, Victorian, and World War eras. She has performed in venues that include the East Bridgewater Public Library last month, John F. Kennedy Presidential Library Museum, and the Massachusetts State House. Born in Boston and raised in Worcester, Frances Perkins stands out as the first female cabinet secretary, the force behind FDR's New Deal, and champion of justice for workers. Tonight you will learn some of the trials and triumphs that characterize Frances's years as labor secretary in the FDR administration and beyond. So sit back, follow Frances as she forges her way through Washington politics. And again, this program is part of the One Book, One Community program.
Cockroaches. And evidently well nourished. Not a single cabinet secretary has stepped out of this office to say as much as, "How do you do?" Is this a harbinger of my life to be in Washington? If so, Lord, help me through it. That characterizes the first day at my new job in Washington. I was Secretary of Labor, the first woman to serve in the U.S. Cabinet. I was serving at the pleasure of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The year was 1933. My name is Frances Perkins. Tonight you will hear about the years I spent in Washington, as well as a bit about my post-political life. To put that into context, however, here is the 25-cent tour of my previous years. I was born on April 10th, 1880, Fanny Carly Perkins. I was born in Beacon Hill and raised in Worcester. My parents were middle-class conservative Republican. I'm going to move this table. Much like one of the courts, if you're so constrained. My parents were middle-class conservative Republicans. So how did a Victorian girl from a middle-class conservative family end up as a rabble-rouser in Washington? It all began at Mount Holyoke College. There, as a student, I visited the factories in Holyoke. That gave me a glimpse, just a glimpse, into life for the working poor. Men, women, children, working in filthy, dangerous conditions. I couldn't forget them. So after graduating, I worked with reform organizations in Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York. We advocated for safety, sanitation, and justice for all workers. It was in Chicago that I changed my name at the age of 22. My name changed from Fanny Perkins to the less whimsical Frances Perkins. And in Philadelphia, my desire to help the poor took the shape of a career. I am going to be a social worker. In 1909, at the age of 29, I moved to New York City to pursue a master's degree in political science. I earned that degree from Columbia University. There, I accepted a position as director of the New York office of the National Consumers League. The League was dedicated to enacting safe, sanitary working conditions, a fair wage, and reasonable working hours. They were also committed to eliminating child labor. It was in New York City, on March 25th, 1911, that I witnessed the Triangle Shirtwaist Manufacturing Company fire. People jumped to their death. 146 people, mostly impoverished immigrant women, perished. They perished because of fire laws that were either flouted or non-existent. That fire set ablaze my determination to be a voice for those mired in misery and scared into silence. I became unstoppable. In 1919, Governor Al Smith appointed me to the Industrial Commission in New York. That commission oversaw industry and labor for the state. I remained there through his 3 terms of office. Then in 1929, Franklin Delano Roosevelt took the helm as governor of New York. He promoted me to the head of the Industrial Commission, again a first for a woman. Of course, you all know that in 1932, Governor Roosevelt became President-elect Roosevelt. Word was in the winds that he was considering appointing me Secretary of Labor. I pretended not to hear. You see, I was already dealing with my husband, Paul Wilson. He suffered from manic depressive disorder, laughing one minute, sobbing the next, in and out of mental hospitals. I also had a sometimes infuriatingly impertinent and stubborn, and other times disarmingly charming and sweet 16-year-old daughter, Susanna. Time would reveal that Susanna had inherited her father's condition. I knew the position of Secretary of Labor would be even more time-consuming than the position I already had. My plate could not bear added responsibility, the weight of a pea. So I pretended not to hear. That became difficult. You see, two women started a campaign. Letters flooded the governor's office. Letters urging him to appoint me Secretary of Labor. And then who stopped by? Mary Dewson. Who else? Oh, Molly's a good egg. I've known her for years. She was a renowned reformer and a powerful woman in the Democratic Party. She came to speak to me about the appointment. Frances, this is an opportunity to enact legislation we have been fighting for, clawing for 20 years. She was right. As Secretary of Labor, I would have influence over enacting laws, giving safety, sanitation, and justice to all, or nationwide. In addition, if I were to accept this position, it may open the door for women in the future to hold high-ranking positions within an administration. And then there was a salary increase. Well, it was modest. You see, President Hoover, because of the economy, had decreased the salary of Labor Secretary from $15,500 a year to $12,700 a year. I was currently making $12,000, so it was only a $700 a year increase. But every dollar mattered. You see, my husband wasn't able to work, so I was the sole support for the family. But what would I do with the family? I can't bring Paul to Washington with me. Oh, can you imagine the gossip? You know, that lady, Secretary of Labor, you know where her husband lives? In a mental hospital. And Susan, what would I do about her? Pluck her out of high school, transplant her in Washington? I would have no time to guide her. This is too much to ask of them. It is too much to ask of all of us. So to keep this appointment wave from becoming a tsunami, I wrote the governor a letter. The letter explained, if you are considering appointing me Secretary of Labor, please know, I cannot accept the position. Takes care of that. Well, it did until the next morning. The phone rang. Hello, Frances Perkins speaking. 2 o'clock? Yes, I will be there. Goodbye. Who's that? Mary Dewson, please. Molly, it's Frances. The governor would like to meet with you this afternoon. Do you know what this is about? Of course I do, Frances, and so do you. Don't be a baby, do the right thing. So, I prepared for this meeting. If I am to accept this position, it will be under certain conditions. I wrote them down in the back of an envelope. The governor and I met. We exchanged pleasantries, you know. The weather, traffic, families, well, his family anyway. He then brought up the appointment. I gave him the envelope with these conditions, along with these words of caution. Governor, you don't want me as your Secretary of Labor if you don't want these things done. He offered me the appointment. I accepted it. You see, I had already consulted with my husband, Paul, assured him he would be cared for. That was his only concern. He was not capable of being concerned about anything else like our daughter, only himself. My next task was to inform Susanna, my daughter. I spoke to her that night, explaining, you and your father will remain in New York. I shall go to Washington and come home weekends. After that conversation, I retired to my room and spent the night crying. I had chosen duty to my country over that to my family. It was March 4th, 1933, Inauguration Day. I had brought Susanna to Washington with me. Though the administration had made no accommodations for cabinet secretaries, and of course the city was full. There was not a motel room in sight. Fortunately, Secretary of Agriculture Henry Wallace made a call twisted an arm and secured us a room at the Willard Hotel. The paint was chipped, and the 15-year-old wallpaper ghastly, but we had a roof over our heads. In his inaugural speech, the president was quite somber and straightforward about the economy. But he also offered hope. He said he was going to request, quote, broad executive power, end quote, to lift the country out of this economic crater. He also offered a phrase that would become part of his legacy. There is nothing to fear. We cabinet secretaries were sworn in later that afternoon. Now, because of the crisis in the country, the president had compressed the time frame for meetings. So instead of asking to meet with his cabinet secretaries in 2 weeks, he's asked us to meet with him in 2 days. So you can understand, I tell you this so that you can understand why. It was not until the very last minute that this ever so critical question even entered my mind. What do I wear? How do I want these other cabinet secretaries to receive me? Well, I want them to see a quiet, orderly woman. So I purchased suits of dark blue, black, and brown, with a hat for each, of course. You know I was born wearing a hat. We met in the meeting went rather well. When it was my turn, the president turned to me and asked for my perspectives on the economy. I looked at the other cabinet secretaries. They looked at me. I began to speak. Some of them appeared to be surprised I could speak. Now you would think that the now former Secretary of Labor, William Doak, would have arranged to speak with me, inform me of the conditions within the Department of Labor. He'd made no such gesture, so I arranged to meet with him. Walking into his office, it was striking. This man apparently has no intention of leaving. Nothing is packed up. We met. He looked up, down, right, left, anywhere but at me. I asked, so what are your perspectives on the economy? Are there any plans in place that I ought to be aware of so I can move them forward? Terrible, terrible tragedy out there. It is a tragedy out there, terrible, terrible. Plans, yes, of course we have plans. Mr. Doak, am I correct that you have a luncheon meeting this afternoon? Yes. I turned to his assistant. Would you please pack up Mr. Doak's belongings and have them delivered to his home while he is at lunch? I then began dictating a letter from the outer office. Secretary of Labor Frances Perkins was now in charge. Time to address the most immediate need within the Department of Labor. The cockroaches. Why are they so big? Well, the answer became apparent. You see, the dining area in the Department of Labor, as well as area restaurants, was segregated. There were people who had no choice but to eat at the desk. So immediately, for the sake of justice, if not sanitation, I ordered all dining areas within the Department of Labor to be desegregated. Now, I could plunge my hands into the department. Word was the Department of Labor was in need of renovation. Imagine my surprise to discover there were entire agencies that needed to be dismantled and rebuilt. Let us look at 3 of them. 1, the Department of Immigration and Naturalization Services. Mobsters are running it. They were labeling people communists and creating reasons to deport perfectly legal immigrants. I started investigating. In a short order, 25 officials were arrested and charged with crimes. 5 others resigned to, quote, spend more time with the family, end quote. Then we have the Department of Employment Services. This consisted of small offices scattered throughout the country. They were repositories for job openings. So if a person was looking for work, they no longer had to rely on some random conversation to find out who was hiring. Well, this program had been robust during World War I. Since then, though, administrations had lost interest, become distracted, slashed funding. The Department of Employment Services was but a withered fragment of what it once had been. This, as unemployment, was soaring. There was quite something interesting I noticed. There were numerous people who, though paid to work full-time, came to work on a semi-retired schedule. I fired all the managers and started rebuilding. Within 4 months, there were 120 offices operating in 90 cities. 12 months later, 12.4 million people had registered with the Department of Employment Services. Then we have the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Well, there were statistics, there were a few, but a large percentage of them were wrong. You see, the Bureau was staffed by certainly intelligent and dedicated, but inexperienced analysts. In addition, President Herbert Hoover had stained the reputation of the Bureau and cracked its credibility. Herbert Hoover was president when FDR was governor of New York, and I was head of the Industrial Commission. And Mr. Hoover, I am certain, was a man of numerous talents. These apparently, however, did not include the ability to guide a country through an economic crisis. So perhaps, not knowing what else to do, he spun tales of imminent prosperity. In one address to the American public, he noted that the employment rate had risen 4%. Now, as Industrial Commissioner of New York, I knew that's not true. I researched. The president was using data from the holiday season. Of course, that 4% rise was due to temporary help. The employment rate was already dropping. I dashed a letter off to the press. The letter explained, the president is deceiving the American public on the matter of employment. That'll hit the papers. Probably the front page. Everybody will see it. Perhaps I should have discussed this with the governor before sending a letter to the press, calling the president a liar. I better tell him. I confessed. Are you going to fire me or kill me? Neither, Frances. Bully. I'm glad you didn't ask me first. I would have told you not to do it. The best thing you can do is this. Don't even mention politics. Simply be an outrageous scientist and social worker. To that end, I hired Isidore Lubin to head up the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Mr. Lubin was an economist from the Brookings Institute. He took two particularly notable actions. First, he upgraded the system for gathering data. As a result, for the first time, the federal government had data on hours worked and wages earned by industry. He then updated the cost of living index. Why, do you know, to determine the cost of living, they were still considering the cost of high-button shoes. Shoes I had worn as a college student 30 years ago. In time, the Bureau of Labor Statistics became a credible source for data. Data we could use to create programs that would put people back to work. In 1933, the country was desperate for such programs. 25 million people were out of work, 1/3 of the working population. 1 out of 6 families had lost their home. In his speech as a candidate, Mr. Roosevelt had talked about the need for a fresh start, A New Deal. New Deal became the title for a set of programs, policies, and reforms designed to bolster and stabilize the economy. If you look at this, you will see these are the areas the New Deal covered. This will give you a sense of the scope of the New Deal. I had my fingers in many of these, but there are three that are particularly relevant to me. The first is the Civilian Conservation Corps. Have you ever heard of the Civilian Conservation Corps? You probably have. Of the CCC. This was one of the early programs of the New Deal. FDR started speaking about it within days of the inauguration. The Civilian Conservation Corps addressed the needs of unemployed, unmarried young men. I see the languishing in the railroad yards and picture each one in a striped prison suit. That surely would be the attire for many if something weren't done. The president said, the federal government is going to hire young men and pay them to work in the forest to care for the land. Frances, design a program and present a proposal to Congress. This is the meat of the program I designed. The Civilian Conservation Corps will be open to unmarried, unemployed men ages 18 to 22. That age was later extended to 28. The participants would be paid $30 a month. $22 of that would be sent home to their families. The federal government would supply food, shelter, clothing, and transportation. But who would administer this? Who was capable of administering such services to hundreds of thousands of people? Oops. The Army, of course. So the Army became a critical component of the CCC. Congress was quite receptive to the idea, even enthusiastic. After my session with them, a staffer repeated a comment made by one of the congressmen. Frances Perkins did awful well. She's awful smart, but I wouldn't want to be married to her. The congressman doesn't have to worry about being married to me, I put back. I happened to ask him. So within 3 months, there were more than 120 camps and 300,000 participants. I wanted to include women. However, families were reluctant to send their daughters into the woods. So there were about 28 camps for women. I also wanted to integrate the camps for the benefit of everybody. But the backlash, opposition was crushing. So I lost on that. But what were these people supposed to do caring for the land? They would plant trees, build bridges, dams, and fire towers. They restore infertile lands, and beautify national parks. In the 6 years of its existence, the CCC participants planted 3.5 billion trees, restoring dead land. They created more than 700 new state parks. They restored endless acres of land. In fact, at that time, if you looked at all the land restored throughout American history, half of that was done by the Civilian Conservation Corps. As FDR had said, this will give the participants more than a paycheck. It will build their confidence, teach them new skills. It will also instill in them a reverence for the land. You know, Frances, we cannot have another Dust Bowl. So the Civilian Conservation Corps targeted unemployed, unmarried young people. But the president also envisioned a set of programs that would give aid to those in need from infancy through old age. He called it a package of economic security. Put together a committee on economic security, Frances, and give me your findings and recommendations by December 24th. This was 1934. Now, this committee would be made up of cabinet-level members and up. There were 17 subcommittees. I served on all 17 subcommittees and chaired this one. I had anticipated 7 or 8, a committee of 7 or 8, until after the conference in November. We held a conference about it. There was so much enthusiasm, we ended up with a committee of 23. But you know the destiny of enthusiasm in most cases. The destiny is death. I held numerous meetings, of course. Secretary of Agriculture Henry Wallace was one who came to most. I was the only one who came to all of them. And remember, the President wanted our findings and recommendations by December 24th. December 18th rolled in. Our findings and recommendations looked like a vacant lot with a few timbers on it. But what the President wanted was the framework of a house. So I called for a meeting to take place at my home on December 22nd. The men gathered. I put a bottle of scotch on the table and announced, "We are not leaving until this package is complete." Needless to say, the President had our findings and recommendations by December 24th. The next few months featured fist-pounding, choice words, and grudging compromise as the Economic Security Bill bushwhacked its way through Congress. However, on August 14th, 1935, FDR signed this package into law. It was called the Social Security Act. There were 4 components to it. Aid to women with dependent children, aid to those who were unable to work, unemployment insurance, and some financial cushion, foundation for retirees. Not just needy retirees, but most retirees. This is how it would work. As a person was working, a small percentage of his or her income would be taxed and deposited into a government-administered account. When the person retired, the government would send that person a monthly check for the rest of his or her life. Of course, we all know this as. So Social Security originally was the name of the entire act, not the name of just one program. So we have the Civilian Conservation Corps targeting unemployed young people, and the Social Security Act giving aid to those in need, as well as a financial foundation to retirees. The Fair Labor Standard Act addressed specifically the needs of workers. There were 4 components to this act. 1, it restricted child labor, restricted labor for children under the age of 18. It established a minimum wage. It implemented a 40-hour work week with overtime pay. It also gave workers the right to organize and bargain collectively. Now, there was fist-thumping, choice words, and grudging compromise as this bill elbowed its way through Congress. That was certainly true of the minimum wage. I didn't think there ought to be a national minimum wage. It made no sense to me. You see, the cost of living differed in different parts of the country. I wanted to establish regional boards. Each board would decide upon the appropriate minimum wage for that area. The union shot back. No, 1 national minimum wage. The Northern Congressman wailed, "Oh, if the minimum wage in Georgia is less than that in New York, companies will move out." I knew that wasn't true. You see, when FDR was governor of New York, he and I instituted a minimum wage. Companies didn't move out. But you know, if you want to turn the wheel, you have to part with a little bit of your own grease. So we compromised on a national minimum wage of how much per hour? Now keep in mind this was 1938. A gallon of gasoline cost 10 cents. A cup of coffee, 5 cents. What do you think the national minimum wage was?
30 cents.
Excuse me? Did I hear 30 cents?
Yeah.
Very close. It was 25 cents an hour. Now that was not ideal. You see, it cost a family of 4 50 cents an hour to live. But that 25 cents an hour That represented a raise for many of the most impoverished, exploited workers. In addition, they knew this. They would be paid at least 25 cents an hour for each hour worked. So through the Fair Labor Standards Act, employees were no longer completely at the mercy of their employers. Well, there was plenty to worry about here. Plenty to keep one up at night, pacing the halls and tearing one's hair out. But I was also concerned about the situation in Europe, particularly the plight of the Jewish people in Germany. They were at the mercy of the Nazis. I had toured Europe in the 30s, and I heard about the persecutions of the Jews, and I could see the fear on people's faces, hear it in their voices. I tried to raise this with the administration. The Jewish people in Germany need a safe refuge. The United States of America ought to provide that. But they tossed my concern aside. Oh, Nazism will disappear, and Hitler with it. They learned differently in 1939, when Germany annexed Austria. Then the administration woke up. Now understand, the Department of Immigration lay within the Department of Labor. So I spoke to the president. I want to increase the quotas for immigrants from Germany and Austria. I can't let you do that, Frances. Well, then I will take 3 years of quotas and compress them into one. I can't let you do that either. What you can do is this. Extend the visas for the 15,000 Germans and Austrians who are already here. I did that, but it was such a weak response to such a crisis, an emergency. So I bent the rules as much as I could. For example, if a family here had an endangered family living in Europe, they could bring them over. In addition, if someone came to this country and wished to study or work, they had to buy a $500 bond. That would prove to the government that they were able to take care of themselves. I reduced the cost of that bond to $150. In the end, I brought over more than 50,000 immigrants from Europe, a large percentage of them Jewish. People hailed that as a victory. For me, it was like dropping 2 aspirin tablets into a sea of suffering. Never could I have dreamed that my efforts to help persecuted people in Europe would be turned into ammunition to be fired at me. You see, anti-Semitism was on the rise within the United States. In addition, there were people who wanted me out of office. There were 3 major reasons. First, what do you think the first reason was? Of course, I was a woman. I was a woman in politics. I belonged in the kitchen cooking dinner for my family. Number 2, I was a rabble rouser. disrupting the comfortable status quo for the more affluent. And number 3, I had the ear of the president. FDR spoke to me in a way he did not anybody else. He'd say, Frances, you're the only one who doesn't have an axe to grind. You're the only one I can truly trust. And then Harry Bridges, that incident, added weapons to the arsenal. Harry Bridges was an Australian immigrant. He came to this country seeking citizenship. In the process, he incited a strike among maritime workers on the West Coast. They were striking for improved working conditions. It was perfectly valid. Well, that strike incited additional strikes. There were businessmen who found these strikes to be profit-threatening, inconvenient. So they labeled Harry Bridges a communist and created a movement to have him deported. I couldn't see that Harry Bridges had done anything wrong. It was not illegal to strike. So I met with the officials. Has Harry Bridges done anything to try to undermine the United States? No. What are you going to do? Deport a man simply on the basis of his beliefs? I tried to delay the deportation. so they aimed and took fire at me. They spun tales. Harry Bridges and I were co-conspirators. Harry Bridges and I were lovers. Now keep in mind, I was a portly woman in my late 50s. Look at Harry Bridges. What are the odds? Harry Bridges and I are married, although I was already married to Paul Wilson. There were calls for my impeachment. Aaron Summers of the Judiciary Committee tried to assuage my fears. Madam Secretary, they're not going to impeach you. It is not the right time. You have other things to worry about. On January 24th, 1939, J. Parnell Thomas, a New Jersey congressman, called for my impeachment on the following grounds: failure to enforce U.S. immigration laws, and coddling and protecting a communist. The Washington Post reported there was an uncharacteristic silence in the room after the charges were read. Now, Congress is largely made up of Democrats, but only a handful came to my aid. The politicians in Tammany Hall I'd worked with in New York some years ago. They demanded time on the floor and an opportunity to speak. Bless those souls. Nothing has so ever touched me in this world. The president I knew supported me, but he never mentioned the impeachment. In fact, as time went on, he added my name less and less frequently. Our hearing date was set for February 8th. I was allowed to bring a companion with me. I brought Labor Department Solicitor Gerard Riley with me. He was being impeached as well. His hearing had taken place the previous day. As he walked along the long hall to the hearing room, I turned to him and asked, "Do you feel like the priest who accompanied Joan of Arc on her way to the stake?" Although we were on time, the hearing had already begun. Aaron Summers was speaking. When finished, he gave the floor to me. I looked at the members of the committee and began by thanking them. Thank you for your patriotism, your sense of justice, and any other piece of flattery that came to mind. I then laid out my position. 4 points. I am not a communist. There's been no conspiracy between Harry Bridges and me or anybody and me. Anyone who poses a clear and present danger to the United States of America deserves no sympathy. Any person who comes to this country and wishes to pursue citizenship ought to be able to do so without fear or favor and with fair play. Committee members tried to interrupt me, but Mr. Summers would not allow it. When I finished speaking, though, they pulled out their darts and I was determined to maintain a posture as a serious, orderly woman, answering their questions truthfully, and in a straightforward manner. If someone asked a particularly vile question, I requested he repeat it. You see, you understand, Lisa, I can tell. It is one thing to ask a question you know to be vicious once. It is quite another to have to state it again. It seemed like an eternity, but 6 weeks later, the committee announced its findings. There was insufficient evidence with which to impeach me. A few weeks later, a judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence with which to deport Harry Bridges. That decision shattered that young lawyer's promising career. Word was he had been on a journey to the Supreme Court. Although I was absolved of any blame, the whole process left my career in tatters. Oh, we had debunked all those myths about Harry Bridges and me being lovers and all. So they pivoted and they chose a vulnerability I could not refute. My age, I was 59 years old. They labeled me a foolish old woman, easily duped. They never called me unpatriotic, just gullible. They spun stories and the press picked up on them. People I knew, people who had known me for years, turned their back on me. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis was said to have remarked, "Frances Perkins has changed." Justice Brandeis, do you remember the work we did together on unemployment insurance a few years ago? Do you remember how elated you were when that was enacted into law? You know me better than that. Perhaps you ought to be more discerning about what you believe, what you read. The Federation of American Women's Clubs, it's turned its back on me. And the allies I had in the administration, they walked away. I sought comfort from my friends and the good nuns at St. Mary's Convent. They referred to me as Mrs. Wilson to protect my privacy. It was 1940. FDR won his third election. I tendered my resignation. As I explained to him, I have no allies. I have no influence. I can no longer serve the people of this country in a way in which they deserve. He rejected my resignation. But late in the year, in 1941, in December, an event occurred that shook the world and upended the United States of America. What happened on December 7th, 1940? Pearl Harbor. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan. 3 days later, on the 11th, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. World War I took that tattered career of mine, rolled it into a ball, and tossed it into a closet. Although, as you can imagine, there were countless meetings about the war, I was excluded from most of them. Officials thought a woman in talk of war did not belong in the same room. Others claimed I was a pacifist, which my record shows clearly was not the case. The president created war-related agencies, some of which dealt with industry and labor. They belonged within the Department of Labor. Instead, he installed them into departments run not by a woman, but by a man. And then he started removing agencies. He had already removed the Department of Immigration Services, but I was actually all right with that. But he removed the Department of Employment Services and the Social Security Board. Entities I had either dismantled and rebuilt or created from scratch. My friend sent a letter to him, "Mr. President, what are you doing?" I felt like a mother who had lost her children. The Department of Labor shrank from 7,000 employees to 3,600. But there was one victory. You see, there were those who thought that women ought to be subjected to the draft. Mrs. Roosevelt was one of them. As she said, "It's only fair." I didn't agree with her. For if women are drafted, who will care for the sick and the elderly? How many orphan children we have in this country? I did feel, however, that women ought to be able to contribute to the war effort in a more robust way than they could. So I spoke to the powers that be. See all those empty seats in the factories? Fill them. Fill them with women. Give the women the jobs. But I warned them, if you wanted to entice women to work, you need to pay them a fair wage. So we started a campaign aimed at women. The campaign aligned working with patriotism. We hired a designer to design a symbol. The symbol was? Yes. That campaign added 6 million women to the workforce. It represented the first time a woman could work outside the home and earn a fair wage. It was the end of 1944. FDR had won his 4th election. I didn't think he ought to have run. The man was too weak, he was too sick. Once again, I offered my resignation. That encounter has engraved itself in my head, my memory, and in my heart. I handed him the letter, he read it, he looked across at me. Frances, you can't put me on this now. Put this on me now. I don't know of anyone else. I can't trust anyone else. His whole face pleaded, don't do this to me. Then he put his hand over mine, looked at me and said, Frances, I know what you've endured, and I know what you've accomplished. We both had tears in our eyes. I agreed to stay. The inauguration took place on January 20th, 1945. It started with church services. The widow of former President Woodrow Wilson saw FDR and commented, he looks the way my husband did when he went into his demise. Moments before taking the oath of office, the president whispered to me, I can't do this. Mr. President, you must. 82 days later, on April 12th, 1945, we received word. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt is dead. Grief seeped into the very marrow of my bones. Oh, the president, of course, had abandoned me during the impeachment and tossed me aside with living expedient. But I didn't speak of those times. I didn't wish to disparage him. You see, there were so many, many times when we had taken our shared vision to give every person in this country a certain measure of safety, sanitation, and justice. While he and I had worked with other people to pull millions of people out of dire poverty and prevent millions from falling into it. The president has been an ally. I shall miss him terribly. The whole administration was shaken up. The head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Isidore Rubin, broke down, sobbing on my shoulder. The press printed a picture of it with the caption, Secretary of Labor Frances Perkins succumbs to grief. I should have expected it. Vice President Harry Truman stepped into the Oval Office. Oh, I had known Harry Truman for years. I gave him his first job in the federal government. He was a good man. I knew he would serve the people well. Privately, he told me, I want you to stay, but I polled the administration. There is too much opposition. Mr. President, you need a great, strong man leading the Department of Labor. He offered me a position heading up the Civil Service Commission. We were charged with assuring fair hiring practices in the government. I discovered the reason for the shortage of secretaries. Too many of the recent applicants had not passed the beauty. I was in a room by myself with a few people. There were no universities coming to remind me that they would love to have me come join their staff when I was out of office, when I left the administration. Nobody was coming asking me to speak, for I was a prolific speaker. Suddenly realized I was a somebody, and now I'm a nobody. I worked in that position until 1952. I was 72 years old. My husband, Paul, died. Now, I know there were people who thought, oh, she must be so relieved. For I had struggled with Paul's mental illness for 34 years. But I didn't feel relieved. I felt like a car without a steering wheel. Dwight D. Eisenhower won the election. the administration would be Republican. What will they do with all those programs we set in place? I think for the sake of your sanity, Frances, you need to leave Washington. You never liked it here anyways. So I sold my red brick house and looked for a teaching position. Those universities that had courted me when I was Secretary of Labor, now, it took a distance. They offered me short-term teaching stints. You see, they did not want to too closely align with a rabble-rouser. As a result, at 77 years old, I found myself in need of a full-time job and a permanent home. You may wonder why a former U.S. Cabinet Secretary would be in need of such essentials. One of the reasons was my husband. I had to pay for all his medical care, for people who care for him in the home, his time in mental hospitals. That siphoned off a fairly significant percentage of my salary. And then there was my daughter, Susanna. She married a young artist. He was a good man with 2 children, and they had one of their own. But as an artist, he did not make enough money to provide for the family. And my daughter was not about to work. So I had given them my rent control department years ago and been supporting them. I felt the need to continue to do so. But how? Cornell University came to the rescue. They offered me a teaching position in their new School of Industrial and Labor Relations. And they gave me living quarters on campus. I had a warm, friendly, jovial relationship with the students and the faculty. The students called me Park. It was 1965. I was 85 years old. My sight was disappearing. I was losing my sight. So I was teaching when I could. I remember I went to a conference. Of course, the students said, "Park, what are you doing going to a conference? You can barely see." "I don't want to miss anything." I came back and contracted pneumonia. So there was lots of time to think. I thought, well, I came to watch. I was a somebody, and now I'm a nobody, but it doesn't matter. I came to Washington to serve God, FDR, and the plain, common, forgotten working person. I gave my all to this service at great sacrifice for my family. But in the end, because of my efforts and the efforts of so many others, the workers of this country are guaranteed a certain level of sanitation, safety, and justice. I can leave this, with the exception of the relationship with my daughter, I can leave this earth with a tranquil conscience and a grateful heart. Frances Perkins died. Frances Perkins died on May 14th, 1965 at the age of 85. She thought she was a nobody, but her legacy tells a different story. We just have a few minutes to go. Her alma mater, Mount Holyoke, established a scholarship in her honor. It's for older returning, by older I mean 25 or so, returning students in need. And they also appointed her permanent class president. She had been the senior class president. They appointed her permanent class president. And then in 1980, on her 100th birthday, the Department of Labor building, the name was changed to the Frances Perkins building. I don't need to put on her accent, do I? Frances Perkins realized something few others did. The significance of the plain, common, working person. Today, it's easy through the magazines, blogs, articles online. It's easy to learn about public officials. Tonight, you have learned about a public servant. Thank you. This is a list of Frances Perkins' accomplishments. This is taken from the Frances Perkins Center website. I lifted it from there. You can see she was a busy woman. And then we have, you know, of course, Frances Perkins was the engine behind the New Deal. So I looked up some New Deal projects in the Bridgewaters. You can see, are you familiar with Legion Field?
Yes.
And the War Memorial Park in West Bridgewater?
Yes.
Those are two Works Progress Administration projects. And this is the shield, the WPA shield. And so does anybody have any questions? I know a lot of you are reading or have read the book.
Yeah.
Stephanie's book. Yeah. Okay, there are a couple of points. As far as her, well, people ask about her daughter. The relationship was very strained. In part because Susanna was bipolar, and there was no treatment for it up until 1970. So, but when Frances died, she died in New York, and the staff at Cornell University asked her, could you please talk about your mother? She said, you probably know more about her than I do. She didn't see very much of her. Her husband, Paul, eventually somewhat recovered to the point where she could bring him to Washington. And he could sit at dinners. He was sullen and quiet, but he improved a little bit. And also what's interesting is when she came into this office, everything was new. So what are the rules of etiquette for a female secretary? There weren't any. So one question was, a reporter asked her, how would you like to be addressed? Well, she didn't care. She said, Miss Perkins is fine. But he kept pecking away at it. So she turned him over to an old etiquette hand, Washington hand, who would know what to do. And he's the one who came up with Madam Secretary, and that stuck. There was also a question of, where's in the hierarchy, what is my position? Secretary of Labor was a fairly low position within the U.S. cabinet. So she took the role of the wife of the Secretary of Labor. That meant when the wives accompanied their husbands, she was walking behind the wife of the Secretary of the Interior, the wives of the other secretaries. And she did it because she didn't want to cause a row. She kept a very low profile. And she learned, she said, if I make a row, like with gossip, then I'll end up in the front page of the Washington Post for something I want to focus on my work. I don't want to have to deal with gossip. So she was she really suppressed her ego and thought strategically, what will allow me to achieve the greatest good. Anyone else have any? Okay, then I should, people also ask, for books, this is my primary source. It's The Woman Behind the New Deal by Kirsten Downey. Kirsten Downey is associated with the Frances Perkins Center in Maine. It's not a book you select if you want to curl up with a cup of cocoa. This is not the book, but it's packed with information. So I heavily relied on this, as well as, this .gov, and also the Frances Perkins website, which is packed with information. It also has recordings of her speaking, which is why I say Frances. Now I think it's time this is the Frances Perkins Center in Damascotta, Maine. This is the place she considered home. It was the home of her grandparents. So as a child, she would spend summers there. And even as a cabinet secretary, she spent the month of August there every year. So that I visited for the first time about 3 weeks ago. And it was magical.
I bet.
Yeah, it was magical for me. So, and now on to the shameless self-promotion. I think I have some other Excuse me, I should have brought one with me. I portray 5 different unsung heroines, 6 scripts, because I developed 2 scripts for Frances. But I portray First Lady Dolly Madison. First Lady Dolly Madison was a political powerhouse and nobody knows it. She was the reason James won the election, because she was his, quote, campaign manager, did all the talking for him. I also portrayed Revolutionary War heroine Deborah Sampson. She is a Massachusetts heroine. She is the only woman known to have disguised herself as a man and served in the Continental Army without getting caught. And I have a fictional lady who talks about myths and miracles of Victorian medicine, turn of the century medicine, a time when doctors had access to x-ray equipment. However, if a surgeon was operating and dropped an instrument on the floor, he picked it up and just continued on. So what really astonished me and intrigued me was the advances that were made in that, like the last quarter of the 1800s, but their primitive practices that also existed. They'll probably be saying that about us in 100 years. And then the etiquette expert of 1890, advice and admonitions from a proper Victorian lady. So if I will be here, just one more round, does anybody have any questions? I'll ask one more time. Well, if you do and you'd rather address me privately, I'll be here for a while. And I thank you all for your attention.
Okay, so don't forget, next month is the big lecture back here on November 24th at 6 p.m. Thank you all for coming.